Welcome to Creating Dangerously. Our name is taken from the Albert Camus 1957 lecture, Create Dangerously, where he said, "To create today is to create dangerously. Any publication is an act, and that act exposes one to the passion of an age that forgives nothing." In Creating Dangerously, we look back at those who have created dangerously to those who continue to do so today in an age that still forgives nothing. I'm your host, Skip Shea, so let's create dangerously.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Creating Dangerously podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Bracken. I'm here as a solo host again this week, but we've got three fantastic filmmakers whose films will all be screening at the Shawna Shea Film Festival coming up in mid-July. And one of the things we love about these three films, we rarely get feature-length animated films, and all three of these films feature, if they're not fully animated, they feature animation to a significant degree. So we wanted to talk to all of them. With us, we have Bob Clark, whose film Autistic Mode is going to be screening on July 19th at 12 noon at Studio 50 at WICN in Worcester. We have Mel House, whose film Inbetweening will be screening the day before, July 18th, also at the radio station at 5 p.m., and Walter Santucci, whose film I'd Rather Be Turned Into Cat Food will be screening on July 18th at 5 p.m. at the Hilton Garden Inn. So welcome, everybody, to the Creating Dangerously podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Nice to be here.
All right, Bob, I wanted to start with your film Autistic Mode. This film has what is really almost a feature-length animated film, but it's interspersed with 5 other films from autistic filmmakers. What was the genesis of this film?
Well, the genesis of this film was a bunch of us had been recruited to work on an indie animated project like a couple of years ago. The indie animation sphere is like really opening up, and there's a lot of people who are both working in the industry on kind of like a freelance basis, and they want to fund their own, like little projects, their own like indie projects. And there's also a lot of people who are finding difficulties getting work in the industry at a time when things like AI is eliminating jobs, and the economy is, always pushing producers to try and eliminate jobs and force more and more work onto smaller and smaller crews. So when you have an indie project open up that you get recruited on, it seems like a great thing, a godsend. However, there were a couple of problems on the project that we had been tapped for. One, it turned out there was no script. So we had to cobble together a script ourselves for this project that somebody had brought us all onto. And two, there wasn't any actual budget. There was no money. So after about a year of waiting for this person to get all their ducks in a row, we decided, we've got to do something else. We've got to move on to other things. So we're all commiserating about the project on Discord. And a bunch of us share the fact that, a lot of us are on the autism spectrum. And when I hear that, I think to myself, okay, wait a minute. We've all got autism. We can get a grant for that. So, and as soon as you do that, I put together a grant proposal to my local grant, my local arts association, Arts Westchester, and they have a program with the NEA that they were doing, Voices for Change, and that got us enough money to fund what this is called is it's an anthology film. Mm-hmm. It's a collection of shorts that are all put together on a common theme. That's what Fantasia was from Disney back in the 40s. That's what Robot Carnival and the Animatrix were in the anime sphere. And I thought this is a great way of getting together everybody to do something. We're all getting basically paid to make portfolio pieces that we can show and hopefully attract people to get us work, or maybe fund, pilots for animation in the future and stuff like that. And, since then, we've been able to get into a number of festivals here and there. And my main goal on this was to really try and put together something that was going to be as like free and full an expression of everybody's different perspectives and experiences on the autism spectrum. So we have a bunch of different genres put together, action, musical, comedy. I have like, my thing, Dreamcatchers, is like a feature-length sci-fi detective story.
Yeah,
And
so
it's very
talk,
much, yeah.
let's start with that.
Sure.
What was the genesis of the idea for Dreamcatchers? As I was wondering it, you mentioned that all of these films are by autistic filmmakers, and they all deal in some way with autism. And I was wondering if nightmares are something that are particular, is a particular problem for autistic people, or is it just a vehicle for you to tell your story?
I think that there are sometimes like reports of like very vivid dreams and very vivid like imagination processes. Like you look at what Temple Grandin has written about autism and her experience, and she's talked about how her own processing is almost like, she compares it to virtual reality and things like that, that her own experience of being able to design processing houses for like cattle and things like that, she's able to put herself into that perspective very easily. In my experience, it was simply because I've spent a lifetime keeping dream journals ever since I was in elementary school. And it just always seemed like a great way of telling a kind of surrealist story.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the things that I have taken influence from and been inspired by in my own, from my own childhood and beyond, have tended to involve dreams in a very heavy way, whether it's David Lynch or Blade Runner or Total Recall, or even things like Fellini, or, the paintings of Dali or Escher's etchings and things like that. This is something that's just always really fascinated me for a long time. And if there's any one like genesis point of it, like for my project in particular, I guess it was like around the time like when I was first watching Twin Peaks as a kid, thinking to myself, I wonder how you would try and do a kind of Twin Peaks story, and you were trying to like pitch it and get it on the air at like Nickelodeon. And that's originally how I came up with the whole idea of investigating nightmares and going into dreams and things like that. Of course, as soon as I started actually writing what I wanted to do, it started to go way beyond what like Nickelodeon would ever put on the air.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is not a Nickelodeon film.
Yeah. Like it's the sort of thing that when I was at that age, I was also watching things like Akira. So like I definitely would have wanted to watch it at that age, but like no, they don't even allow things like guns or anything. They're definitely not going to allow a lot of the stuff that I put there. But that is sort of like the initial genesis point, thinking of something that's somewhere halfway between Twin Peaks, Pete and Pete, and Are You Afraid of the Dark? Although, like I said, it does go beyond much more into like Paprika territory.
Yeah. Could you talk a little, I know your fellow filmmakers couldn't be with us today, but could you talk a little bit about each of their films just briefly?
Oh, sure. One of the things that I was really inspired by and really loved seeing from everybody is that there was a real diversity of different interests and different things that people were homaging. And you were really also getting like a full breadth of, you could say, animation history on the stuff that people were inspired by. Like Charles Moss is an animator from Texas. He was doing a story like Honey Jack that is very much inspired, like, first of all, it's like a fully written in rhyme and sung musical that he did, which is a lot of fun with songs and everything. But it was very much inspired by like Hanna-Barbera cartoons, like Yogi Bear. There's nods to that. And he really is doing a good job at like hitting that kind of halfway between Hanna-Barbera television animation and UPA styles that you had like with Mr. Magoo and everything. And since we're all doing things in kind of like an animatic storyboard style where there's limited animation and animatic style animation, well, like Hanna-Barbera and UPA, like Mr. Magoo, they barely had any animation to begin with there, or Rocky and Bullwinkle. So that sort of thing is perfect there. It really fits in really well. And you have like a delightful kind of song story structure there that's really giving you these like, nice misfit characters. Malcolm Thomas then is doing like he's from California and he was doing a very personal story, but like in a very pure Tex Avery style. And like Tex Avery is a sort of like Tex Avery is like an animation style that I would never go near myself because like I'm just not confident enough in myself to be able to try and match what he's doing, even like in an animatic style. And he really pulls it off in a nice way that you're getting a full emotional story that also has like a lot of great gags and humor and everything. And one of the things I loved is that like, even though he's doing like the Tex Avery style, he also throws in a lot of like modern day gags like red pill, blue pill from the Matrix and stuff so that it stays current, which is what, Tex Avery was always doing. Nick Busby did a cartoon called Hard Mode, which is very much done in like the JRPG adventure game style, which is also very good because like you do something like that, you can have things like text boxes and game effects to really help sell the story even on a limited basis. They tell a very full adventure story in that. Then you have like Gabrielle Teaford's Canvas, and that's like every time I've had this screened, that's always the short that people come up to me and say like that one made them cry.
Oh, it's beautiful.
And it's like, yeah, it's a beautiful piece. Like in terms of like if this whole project for me was inspired by like Robot Carnival, that one is like the real gem in the midst. That's The Cloud. It's a wonderful piece of art, and I'm really proud to see something like that come together in our collection.
Yeah, that's one of the wonderful things about Autistic Mode is all five of the films are very different. Somehow they all work together and tell that story. So really great job on the film. We'll come back to Autistic Mode in just a bit, but I want to turn it over to Walter Santucci. His film I'd Rather Be Turned Into Cat Food. You describe it as a strange confluence of My Dinner with Andre, Sid and Nancy, and Sesame Street. And I don't even think that does it justice. So can you kind of give us a thumbnail sketch of I'd Rather Be Turned Into Cat Food?
The My Dinner with Andre part comes from the fact that the movie is basically one long conversation. Sid and Nancy part comes from it being very punk rock. And Sesame Street comes from there's puppets and there's animation and it cuts away to all these wild things. It's designed for people with no attention span, like myself. It's like I get bored quickly. I want to see something else. And beyond that, I mean, yeah, there's probably a million other influences to that.
Yeah, and one of the fascinating things about this film is you kind of tackle everything, but it also seems to be a very personal story. So you don't shy away from talking about, does God exist? What made you want to tell that kind of story?
It just happened. I was thinking, and this is several years before I made the film. I was just thinking about the state of the world and how it's a very brutal, cruel place if we let certain momentum take over. Okay, there's a lot of competitiveness amongst human beings, and we can, if we don't check ourselves, we can be very cruel to each other. We can be ruthless to each other. And I started writing some things down about that. No intention to make a film. I just had ideas I was thinking about. And then a few years after that, we had a new president in 2016. And I saw people on TV crying, these white people crying, saying that God had sent Donald Trump to save white people. And I started thinking, it's like, well, if God did exist and the world is in the state it is, maybe, forgive me for saying this, but God is an asshole and he would send Donald Trump, and maybe that's all true. And so the film was basically, in a way to stand up to that. And the right wing, well, it's become fascism now,
Mhm.
to basically take a stand against everything that they hold sacred. And if you watch the movie, there's a lot of irreligious things, but at the same time, it's driven by a desire to find kindness and happiness. And it
Mhm.
says that we shouldn't look to something to save us. We can save ourselves. There's billions of people. Why would we ever be lonely or in danger? We can always help each other. And so I think, a lot of people latch on to the negative side of this film. And it's very easy to do that. It's just like
Mhm.
you catch the wrong part out of context. You're just like, okay, this is an evil movie. But it's not, but it's still negative.
Mhm.
But that's where it came from, is this idea that a lot of people use religion as an excuse to hurt people. I was saying, and it's resisting that.
Yeah, but it also doesn't. I mean, I think we're selling the humor of this film short as well. It's a very funny film.
If I told you that your dog died and then said, "Oh, by the way, I have the funniest joke in the world to tell you." No matter how funny the joke is, you're not going to laugh because your dog just died. And I
Mhm.
think this movie is like that. I open up, psh, your dog died, and then I put these jokes, and I wonder if anybody ever laughs because I know I killed the mood in the in the first minute.
I can promise you that both myself and Skip Shea, are the founder of the festival, thought it was quite funny. So
Okay, good, good,
I
good.
don't know what that says about us, but
It
I think
means your
people
dog
enjoy
is okay.
it. I also wanted to ask about the animation style you chose for the main character because he refers to himself as ugly. You don't really ever see his face. You see a constantly shifting pattern on his face that kind of represents whatever he's talking about. How did you come up with that idea for that character?
That was the last thing that came into place. When I was thinking about how to put all these ideas into movie form, I thought, okay, a discussion, that would be great. And having two of the characters be puppets, I was like, as an animator, I was like, yes, hand puppets. I don't have to animate. So if I like did 5 minutes of dialogue drawing, it's a long process. But if I was like having a hand puppet just moving in front of the camera for 5 minutes, I've got 5 minutes of footage.
Yeah.
But I knew I didn't want the human to be a puppet because human puppets, I feel, don't work in a serious way. I mean, you can have Guy Smiley on the Muppets. He's a silly human. That works. But none of the serious puppets I've ever seen as for people appealed to me. So I knew he had to be animated. And I tried a bunch of different styles. And I can't remember when that gelled, but I was just trying out things. And I thought, it'd be cool if instead of using the same face, same mouth, it'd probably be more fun to just improvise. And so that just was like straight ahead every frame of that dialogue. I just drew something new off the top of my head. I didn't plan
Mhm.
it.
Oh, wow. It's great. It's great. It really, like you said, it is sort of like My Dinner with Andre, and that a lot of it is a conversation, just a conversation between this guy and the two puppets. But the fact that his face is constantly changing always keeps you visually interested, even in
I was
those
hoping.
conversation. Yeah, it's a great job. Okay, we'll come back to I'd rather be turned into cat food, but I do want to turn to Mel now, whose film Inbetweening is a little bit different than the others in that it's mostly live action.
Mhm.
But like I'd rather be turned into cat food, it also contains animation, puppetry. You could almost you Mel, your puppets could almost cameo in Walter's films.
Oh
They're
yeah.
very similar style. So, uh, talk us through Inbetweening and why you decided to add these other elements of animation and puppetry into what is mostly a live action story.
Sure. Inbetweening is basically it's like a very autobiographical, just slightly obscured autobiographical bit about my last 20 years trying, being an independent filmmaker and just some of the weird situations and conversations that I've had with people, and it started to grow from that. But there was a moment. So the animation kernel started when there was a moment when I was trying to pitch a project, and I knew that it wouldn't. I knew that we wouldn't be able to have enough money or resources to do it live action. So I was like, well, we could do this. We might be able to pull this off as an animated thing. And the producer I was working with at the time had some history in doing that. So I thought, oh, well, maybe this will work. And when I took it to, he was enthusiastic, but when he opened it up to the people he worked with, they were like, well, no, why would this be? They just shot it down like they do in the movie. Like they were like, well, you need to have a talking dog or, something fantastical. It needs to justify being animated, like something you can't do for real. And I was like, well, the justification is we can't do this for real. We can't afford, to do these things. So that's kind of when I started thinking about, well, I was already putting these stories down to eventually put them into a script. And then as I was writing, I was like, well, this scene really needs to take place in like a hospital situation, but I knew that we wouldn't be able to get that location. At least not in the past. We've had access to one, but our connection is no longer exists. Unfortunately, we didn't screw it up, but that person moved on. So I knew. Then I started thinking, okay, well, how about I think about these things that we can't easily shoot in an animated sense. And in that time that I was developing it, I had started working with an animator, Nick Butler, who he had actually helped me do some of the animation for, it was more like creature animation, like 3D tentacle type stuff for a couple of the horror movies I did with him. But he always told me that his real passion was 2D classic animation. So I kind of kept that in the back of my head, and I was like, okay, maybe Nick will want to animate some of these scenes, and I can kind of work in that whole bit about us not being able to pull off the animated project. So that's kind of how that grew. And then the puppets, I mean, honestly, I grew up on the Muppets. I've always wanted to work with puppets, so that whole sequence, the main sequence with them, it was just like my love of puppetry, and I've always wanted to do something like that.
Yeah. Uh, you mentioned how personal this is. And when
Mhm.
we were listening to Bob talk about the problems he had on his indie film,
Mhm.
you've got a whole sequence where your main character is talking about his experience on a film series that is deep into its lifespan.
Uh-huh.
and and the troubles he had on that production. I did look it up, and you did work on a similar
Yeah,
film
it is
series.
100%. That is 100% autobiographical.
Yeah. So I was just wondering about putting so much of yourself into a film. How that felt. I think your character talks about how that's how he processes things. Is that
Yeah,
is that something that
that's
you agree with?
exactly it, and I've much like in the movie, I've caught shit from people about doing that to a certain extent, but I'm like, this is my therapy to a degree, like this is how I get it out. I've got to kind of purge this. And with this movie, I really did struggle with it because there's a little of me in every movie I've made, but it's always obscured by other stuff, right? But this is the most raw it's been, and open I've been about it. So I really struggled with it, but even writing the script back when I didn't even know I was going to be able to make it was therapeutic for me.
Hmm.
So I'm like, I'm going to put it all in. We may not ever make this. And then it became, Pinocchio became a real boy. And I was like, okay, well, I even while we were shooting, I'm like, do I want it, or even while I was editing, do I want to put this part in? Like, is that going to be too personal, or I just didn't. I wondered if people would be awkward about hearing that much about my stuff.
Hmm.
But what I've found from all the screenings is that things become more more personal something is, the more general it is as far as people relating to it. Everybody kind of like they plug into it. When we premiered it last year, I was surprised at how well it went over because I thought, people would be like, "Oh, this is some navel gazing, self-important," like what the guy says in the movie. But no, it's like everybody, and they all took different. Like everybody has especially artists, filmmakers, particularly, everybody has a part of it they really relate to.
Hmm.
Even though I thought it would just be inside baseball from my experience, but yeah, so it seemed to resonate in that way.
Yeah, one of the really personal things you put into it is that the main character is half black and half white and
Hmm.
seems to have a problem fitting into both worlds. Can
Yes.
you can you talk about that as a filmmaker and personally?
Yeah, that's always been, that's been something that's haunted me kind of my whole life. And when I was younger, I didn't really think about it. You don't contextualize it in that way. I'm just like, dad's black, mom's white, no big deal. But as I got older and started to interact with people, it became a thing. Like there were times where there's one story I always tell where I was working on a project with people in school, and we had to go work at this kid's house. And when his mom found out that I was half black, because I think my dad dropped me off or something, or was coming to pick me up. He's the black one. She made me go out on the porch and work with them through the back door. Like I couldn't be inside their house because I was, half black. And I'm like, nothing changed, like you found out my dad is. So like that's the more like visceral stuff that I've encountered. But then there's like these other weird little things like when I started getting into like rock or punk or metal music, people would be like, "What? That's white people shit," or like, "What do you do?" And so that's why I really was like, I need to have Angelo in this because Fishbone is one of the first bands I really loved. And at the time, a lot of black people were like, "Why are they playing white people music?" I'm like, "Well, it's not white people music. The rock has a long and storied history, in black culture, but." So it's like it was kind of a parallel thing, their struggles with that, and then my dealing with that, and up to me trying to pitch movies. Like there was this ghost movie I was doing and it was written for a black lead or a mixed lead. It was important to the story, and every meeting we had was like, well, can you make it a white guy? Can you make the black guy his sidekick? Can you urban him up? It was, I mean, just like we touch on that in the movie, but it's like I pull back on the notes that I got from those people because you wouldn't believe what they actually said.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was so ridiculous. But and I kept hearing, no one would ever go see a horror movie with a black lead. And then like 2 years after that, Nope came. That was before. I mean, Get Out came out. It was right before. So I'm like, look, guys, people obviously want to see this. So it's a constant weird struggle. I mean, to this day, and I still kind of there are things in the movie where I'm like, well, this is my experience, but can I speak to that because I'm not people I don't read as black, you know what I mean? Like is it on are people going to get mad because I say this? That's why I put that part in the movie where uh the cameo where I'm like, oh, I'm half black like him. So I'm like, hey guys, I I have experience with this. Don't get mad at me. So I second and third guess so many things, even though it's like what honestly happened to me.
Since you mentioned Angelo from Fishbone, I just wanted to say what a find he was. He's hilarious
Oh
in
yeah.
film.
Yeah.
So he does a great
Yeah, it's
job.
awesome. It was crazy because I was so nervous because he's like one of my musical. I mean, they're on my wall back here. That's their poster up there. And I was so nervous working with him. And he's like considered to be one of the world's greatest frontmen, and he's played with Prince, he's a notable musician. But he was more nervous about being on camera because he had never done film acting. So that's what kind of eased me into that sort of situation. Like he was worried about doing well.
Mhm.
So it worked. But yeah, he's great. He's great.
Yeah. I did want to throw a question out to the group. Bob, you mentioned kind of some of the challenges that you're facing in animation now with the advent of AI. It feels like it's kind of a weird time in animation now. With the Academy Award winner last year was Flow, which was a really independent animated film. So from the outside, it looks like maybe things are getting easier for independent filmmakers, but I wanted to get each of your takes on that. What is the state of the animation industry right now? And Bob, we'll start with you.
It feels like, as with like indie in general, there's always like multiple scales of indie. I remember like when people were like talking about indie filmmaking in the 90s, and the bar that everybody was comparing it to was Quentin Tarantino. Like I love Quentin Tarantino's work, and I think that, you know, Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction are true blue American classics that you can hold up to the likes of John Ford and John Huston and any of them. But it needs to be remembered, those were bankrolled by Disney. Like Miramax was a Disney company even then. And all of his stuff, all of his early stuff from Reservoir Dogs to Kill Bill, before like Weinstein left and formed his own company, those were all Disney joints. And that doesn't mean that those movies aren't great pieces of art and they're not great films, but at the same time, I don't like, it's a different kind of indie definition. Now, this is something that has always affected filmmaking in general. And one of the nice pieces of context I think that you can look at this is there's like Tarantino has talked about like Sam Fuller's films in the 50s and the 40s. And he did a lot of movies over at 20th Century Fox that you would look at and say these are really striking contemporary independent visions, but they were also all bankrolled by Daryl Zanuck. Like genuine independent filmmaking has always been sort of a weird outlier, and you're always going to be like judged and expected to have a certain kind of polish that I think a lot of the real independents out there sometimes aren't able to get. Now, that's especially true in animation. You look at a lot of the indie stuff that's being put out there right now, most of it is being done by people who do have a lot of like network and studio experience, who want to branch out and do stuff that they wouldn't be allowed to over at Disney, or maybe in years past could have been bankrolled at something like Warner Brothers, but now they're basically not wanting to bankroll anything new. You know, even like stuff that they did, like I just put on like the new Looney Tunes movie with Daffy and Porky for my niece that Warner Brothers didn't even release itself. It's kind of ridiculous. So you have a lot of people who are doing stuff like that and wanting to have like real like genre pushing stuff and boundary pushing stuff, but also because they're coming from like industry experience, they can have stuff that looks really polished and looks like network broadcast ready quality. You look at a lot of the stuff like Hell of a Boss, Has Been Hotel, Lackadaisy, beautiful, beautiful stuff. But if you're really starting out independently on your own, I wonder sometimes if it's necessarily healthy to look at that and say, like, that's what I want to animate. And I look at that and I think to myself, personally, I can't animate on ones by myself. I don't even know if I can animate on twos by myself. And that's one of the reasons why I looked at both the animatic genre, which has really been booming up in popularity, really, it seems, in the wake of like musicals like Hamilton and Beetlejuice and people wanting to experience those things and only having like the original cast albums to listen to when they're like living out somewhere far, you know, waiting for like the show to tour, and they want to draw something to live out that experience beforehand. But the other thing that I look at now is like, I also grew up watching like Bill Plimpton's cartoons and his animation, and he has a lot of beautiful stuff. And, you know, I'm talking about like animating on ones and twos. I think you're lucky if he ever animates on threes and fours. He is really pushing like how little animation you can do sometimes, and it's beautiful. It's really great stuff. And what I always think of in terms like what I'm doing in terms of my animation and animatics is a lot of the indie filmmakers before Pulp Fiction and before you had high polished indie works out there, they were shooting on black and white. They were shooting on 16 millimeter. They were accepting lower production standards because it made it cheaper and helped you get the job done a lot easier. I think it's great to have animation that looks like shit sometimes if you're communicating a vision that, you know, is genuinely independent and is going to be like transgressive and getting in people's face sometimes.
Yeah. And Walter, you probably have another perspective on this because you do have a lot of industry experience. You've been an animator for years. So how have you seen the animation industry change recently?
Well, okay, so what Bob touched on, which is what was going through my mind the whole time I made my movie, was the levels of what is independent. Because Flow had it wasn't highly rendered like a Pixar movie, but it was still beautiful. And the animation was amazing. And its budget was in the low millions, but it was millions. Okay, so that's different from me, whose budget was nothing. And I mean, seriously, it was nothing. But what went through my mind was like, okay, what can I do? What can I take from my experience to work with nothing? It's like, okay, let me design a style that intentionally looks grungy and nasty. And that's fit in perfectly with the punk rock attitude of the movie, because punk rock, if you listen to the early punk rock albums like the Damned and the Black Flag albums, they're nasty sounding. Okay, they bad recording, um, bad instrument sounds, still great because of the energy. And so that's what I was going for. And I did look at a lot of films that were on the independent spectrum. Okay. And I looked, what were the films that are truly independent, not independent with a few million, and there's one called Consuming Spirits. I don't know if any of you have seen that. It was from 2012. Great movie. The guy who directed it just had a bunch of people animate it for him. Different styles from scene to scene. Like some would be using stop motion puppets, and then it'll go to hand drawn pencil on paper. No rhyme or reason. And it was great. It was just like, you know what, let's just get this thing done. And there was a higher quality film called Rocks in My Pockets, came out a few years ago. And maybe it's like 2012, 2011, there was one called Sita Sings the Blues. And these were all indie animated films that I felt were really independent. And then I looked at them as like, can they hold our attention? And I felt like that was the main thing. And I think, Bob, you talked about that too. It's just like, is it a good movie, then it can have rough edges and things like that. So I think the technology is in everybody's hands. This is how the industry's changed. If you sit down and want to make an animated movie, now you can. Before, back in the days with cells and having to paint cells and shoot film under a camera, those things really made the cost skyrocket. You couldn't have no budget. You had to pay for materials. Now, if you can draw directly into your computer, you have the right software, then it's just your time. And I think that's whether or not those films are going to get distribution. That's the other question, because I mean, cat food, it's a tough sell. Okay, I've had a lot of really good distributors interested in it from the trailer, and some of them, after I sent them the movie, wouldn't even return my emails after that. I mean, they were just like, "Oh my God, stay away from me." So mine is it's tough to gauge how that, you know, if my movie was like a happy movie or not so in your face, and it looked the same, maybe it would have, you know, the distributors would have been more interested in it. But I think in some parts of it, I go too far for even edgy distributors.
Honestly, I think that's one of the things that makes the film great. So, but unfortunately, I don't own a distribution company. Um, Mel, I don't know how often you've worked with animation before, but so you can kind of take this as just this question to just the indie film industry, because you talk a lot about that in your film. How has that changed over the years, gotten easier or more difficult?
Yeah, I mean, Bob mentioned it and Walter touched on it a little bit, but it's when I was in film school, that was around that Tarantino, Rodriguez, Rebel Without a Crew. That was right. This is like 94, 95. Right when like my first couple projects I shot on film, you know, on a 16 millimeter. So I had to learn to do that. So obviously the barrier for entry has like almost gone completely away, because now you can just go out and shoot a movie with your phone, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that's both good and bad, you know, because I think there were a lot of you know, now pretty much anybody can make a movie. And I think people a lot, and I've run into the situation working on crews, a lot of people get into it before doing the planning that it would take to really pull it off, you know, because you can do it so easily. And I think that's how you get a glut of, I mean, that's why we're kind of getting buried in a glut of content on a lot of these sites. It's like, and if you watch some of the movies, is someone going to watch past the first 10 minutes of this? And then if they see your thing on that site too, if it's not compelling and doesn't grab you, if the trailer doesn't do that, then they're just going to be like, oh, well, this is just like the other stuff, right? So I mean, that's a negative, but also it's made things a lot easier. Like I could make like just like Walter and Bob, like I had nothing pretty much to do this. We got a grant to make Inbetweening, and a lot of it I pretty much had to do myself. It was just like a one-man crew, and there's no way I could have done that like back in the day. So the technology has definitely opened that up quite a bit. Like a lot of the movie I did shoot on my phone just because it was easier. That found footage stuff on the train, because of just getting the focus and having to have someone pull focus, and it was just easier to do on the phone. So that's definitely a plus. I know Nick, our animation director, I mean, he was able, because when we started, I actually initially had planned, when I first envisioned this, I was like, oh, I'll do like what Walter mentioned with that movie that had various different styles of animation. I planned to do that because I'm like, there's no way I can ask one person to take on all this work for like $5 or whatever. So let me maybe, because I knew I was teaching an animation and filmmaking class in a video camp, so I knew a bunch of other animators, both teachers that taught and kids that wanted to help. So I was like, oh, let's put a bunch of things together. But Nick early on said, oh, I want to do it all. I want to do all the animation. I'm like, really? Like, you're going to be able to do that? And with him, it was the technology definitely helped him, but he did have to bring other people in. Like, he actually put a core group of animators together on Discord, and like just people all over the world are kind of just doing pieces for us, which again is a kind of a sign of the times. Like, you really couldn't do that before. And when I decided to do the musical number animated, which it was supposed to be live action, but it just logistically was too difficult with schedules and everything. I knew that Nick already had his plate full. So I outsourced to an animation company in India that we had
Hmm.
worked with before on some horror movie stuff. Again, they had done just like effects cleanup for us, but they would always push, we can do 2D, we can do 2D, because a lot of what they do are like children's shows.
Mhm.
Like they'll outsource the animation over there for them to like just basically do the in-betweening, right? Just
Mhm.
not, and they kept pushing me. They're like, we can do it. We can do it. So I outsourced that section of them. That's why it kind of looks different. And, but it still kind of has that rough hewn. My daughter, when she saw the movie finally, she was like, oh, that looked like BoJack Horseman. And I was like, I never thought of that, but that's awesome. I'll take it. But that's another thing where it's like, I don't know when I started this if I'd be able to connect or reach out to someone over in India to do this work for me and just the process was just as if I was working with Nick, just like sending him notes. It was really no different. The only thing that we kind of lost, just some nuance, just like language and culture kind of
Yeah.
jokes, you know what I mean, that I kind of had to explain. But no issues there. But I up to and including distribution, I think the every other movie I've released has gone through a distributor. I mean, a couple of them have gone through big ones, but I decided to self-distribute this one just because it's kind of a difficult sell, like Walter said, like people are like, just don't return your emails, because it's just kind of a difficult thing. But also with this movie in particular, because I'm bitching about what has happened with me on all the other movies, like why do I want to do that again? Right. So I put it out. I put it on Film Hub, and that's what got it out to the platforms that it's on. And the movie's been out for 6 days on streaming. I've already made more money than I've made on any of the other
Oh, wow.
movies. Yeah. So Walter, I would say look into that. Film Hub is pretty awesome. Yeah.
Well, speaking of that, we're hoping that everybody comes to see your films at the Shawna Shea Film Festival, July 18th and 19th. I'll repeat those dates and times at the end. All three filmmakers are going to be at the film festival, so they'll be there to answer your questions. But if somebody can't attend the film festival, where can they find out more about your films? And Mel, since you kind of
Yeah.
brought
Kicked it
this
off.
up, I'll let you start.
Sure. Yeah. So we actually are on streaming now on Amazon, Tubi, and Fawsome. That it went live on the first. I actually thought it wasn't going to go live till the fall because I heard that it would take a long time. So that's why I kind of was like, we'll do more festivals. And they're like, surprise, you're up. So good problem to have, I guess. But so you can find Inbetweening on all those platforms. Upstartfilmworks.net is my production company website, and there you can find info on Inbetweening and all the other stuff like Mystery Spot, my previous movie, and then some of the other things. That's kind of the one-stop shop for all my stuff.
All right, great. Walter, what about I'd rather be turned into cat food?
I would say best bet would be Evil Catland, as in it's like Disneyland, but for evil cat.com. And that's my company website. And so there's a separate page on there. If you remember evilcatland.com, you can go there and scroll to the cat food section. And so it's not streaming anywhere. It's got a few theatrical things lined up. But as things get added, it'll all be on that site.
Okay, great. And Bob, what about Autistic Mode? Where can people check out?
Well, you can reach me at Neo Westchester on Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, everything like that. I'm at Neo Westchester. We've got like a couple of trailers and like an 8-minute preview of my section, Dreamcatchers, is up on YouTube. You know, we don't have the full thing up anywhere right now, but you can see the first like 8 minutes of my thing and see if you want to see the rest. And beyond that, I try and keep like a collection of all the different portfolio links for everybody involved in the project at Linktree/Autistic Mode.
Okay, great. Well, we do hope you all come to see these films at the film festival. Mel House's Inbetweening will be screening on July 18th at Studio 50 at WICN in Worcester, Massachusetts. That's going to be at 5 p.m. Across town, Walter Santucci's I'd Rather Be Turned Into Cat Food will be screening at the Hilton Garden Inn, also at 5 p.m. And Bob Clark's Autistic Mode will be screening the next day, July 19th, at Studio 50 at WICN, and that'll be at 12 noon. Thank you all very much. Your films are fantastic. I hope more people see them, and great job.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
All right, I'm Patrick Bracken for the Creating Dangerously podcast, and we'll see you all next time.
May I have your attention, please? I think you all remember the bargain we made about staying all night.
Not tonight, Vincent. We all have to rest up and get ready for the Shawna Shea Film Festival coming up on July 16th through 19th at the Hilton Garden Inn and Studio 50 at WICN in beautiful Worcester, Massachusetts. Look forward to seeing everybody there, including you, Vincent. The Creating Dangerously podcast is a production of the Shawna Shea Memorial Foundation, Inc., a 501c3 arts educational nonprofit organization. The views and opinions expressed on the Creating Dangerously podcast are not necessarily those of the Shawna Foundation or its affiliates. Not that we have any. Thanks for joining us, and remember, keep creating dangerously.